everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Carrow Road. Apologies, I've got a lawnmower going behind me. It's an impeccable timing, but hopefully you can hear me. We are stood here in the aftermath of Norwich City's 1-0 defeat to Sunderland this afternoon, a result that feels like it's kind of taken some of the air out of the balloon of optimism and positivity that David Barkin has been assembling, particularly in the last few weeks, but probably since his time in charge at Norwich City. But it has ended Norwich City 0, Sunderland 1 here today. Bar's goal inside the opening 20 minutes, the difference. And from there, a lot of huffing, a lot of puffing, but Norwich City were unable to find a way through. And in truth, probably never really looked like scoring. Let's deal with the game first, then we'll deal with kind of my take on it. Really frustrating afternoon, probably one that can be summed up in a noise, just by going, one of those type of afternoons, sluggish. And the thing is about this Norwich City team, if you want to give them praise and speak about the character test of last weekend, you absolutely can, but you also need to realise that what today was sluggish and probably reflects why they are where they are in the league table, which is because you cannot put your hat on them. You cannot rely on them to produce a performance. You cannot expect them to be consistent. Once again, Sunderland came here this afternoon. They came with a clear game plan. Tony Mowbray's spoken about it in his post-match press conference. He knows teams in the Championship know Norwich City concede goals from individual errors. Therefore, teams are going to press them. They need to find a solution to that. They were unable to do that today. And what we got after Bar's goal, which, again, for me, Grant Hanley doesn't get tight enough to him. To be fair, I think he's slightly wary because there's a gaping hole in Norwich City's midfield. It's a lovely kind of progressive pass to Joe Gelhardt. He then finds Bar. Just squares up Hanley. Hanley gets caught a bit flat-footed, and then he actually goes between his leg. Gunn is trying to peer. He's trying to peer to get a view from the other side. So to ask him to come back and lunge feels quite tough. It's a really good finish, and from there Sunderland looked in real control of this counter, and it allowed them probably. I mean, they maintained what they did in the first half. In the second half, they were happy to be a bit more pragmatic, a bit more conservative. Should have had a second soon after when Joe Gelhardt was sent through after Ben Gibson stepped up again to try and cover space that was left in Norwich City's midfield. But Angus Gunn produced a really, really big save. And actually, those two chances were the best that anyone created all afternoon on this football pitch. And that is reflective of perhaps the huffing and puffing that Norwich City did do. And what followed the goal, what followed Bar's goal, was a period of 20 minutes or so that was just absolute chaos. Norwich City were making errors. They lacked composure on the ball. They lacked quality. There was a real discontent in this place and a real frustration. They looked like players that hadn't played on the same pitch before, in all honesty. They were struggling to string passes together. Their structure went. Their heads looked like they'd gone, to be honest. And they really struggled to kind of reclaim themselves. And I think that feeds into the overall narrative that David Wagner's spoken about, and we've spoken about as well, and probably everyone else has spoken about, which is when this team faces adversity, when they concede a goal, they really, really struggle to change that picture and also to probably find some composure as well to respond to that goal, which obviously is a defining moment in a football match, but sometimes there's not enough just kind of, okay, let's calm, let's keep doing what we're doing, keep being proactive, because actually prior to that goal, there were some good signs. I wouldn't say that they were exceptional or anything like that, but there was certainly some productive stuff, constructive stuff that they could have built upon. They threw a goal in, and then for the 20 minutes that ensued was chaos, erraticness, leaving gaping holes, their structure completely dissipated, and they really struggled to regain any sort of control on this game. Now, that suited Sunderland. They were happy, they were pressing, they were happy to exploit spaces. Jack Clark on this near side to me here was having so much joy against Max Aarons. They were getting players, they were overloading areas of the pitch, they were happy to press, but also they knew that they could kind of set traps for Norwich because they were trying to play passes that were too ambitious, or because of the erraticness, the chaos that was ensuing, they were able to pick up balls pretty quickly. And Norwich really struggled to regain control in that portion of the game. They did so for 5 or 10 minutes before half time, but again, it was kind of limping to that. Josh Sargent came on within the first 10 seconds. They thought about pressing a lot more. They nearly had a manufactured opportunity when they closed down Nathan Patterson. But in terms of really clear-cut opportunities, they didn't really create much. They had territory, they had possession. I thought Sunderland defended their goal exceptionally well. And actually, in the end, you probably come to the conclusion that the better team here today and this afternoon won this game. And that is the truth of the matter. Norwich City were poor. It felt a little bit of a hangover from last weekend, which was obviously a massive victory. They put so much energy into it, but that's not an excuse. They had a week of training and preparation ahead of this one. And kind of feeds into where I feel Norwich City are at the moment. And look, throughout, I'm not sort of changing like the wind upon a result. But I think I've said this throughout the season. Hopefully people who've watched these throughout this season will be able to back me up. I've kind of said that I feel that Norwich will fall just short this season of the playoffs and of the top six. And the major reason for that is because the up and down nature of performances, and it's so difficult to rely on this Norwich City team to produce a result. And yes, okay, they've put a string of results together before this, but they are capable, and we saw it again at Wigan at points as well, and they were lucky not to lose that game. We saw it against Bristol City, probably at Bristol City more pertinently than Burnley, which was a case of individual errors, but we saw it obviously earlier in the season under Dean Smith as well. This team has that kind of performance in them, and that's really dangerous, I think, when you're trying to put a run together, when you're trying to challenge for something. That's not to say that Norwich won't get in the top six this season. I'm certainly not saying that, but all I'm saying is it kind of backs up what I feel about this group, which is the consistency that they lack is probably going to cost them in the end, or could potentially cost them in the end. And that is where the frustration lies, I think, with this Norwich group, because you turn up, you never really know which one you're going to get. And yet the group of players should be doing better than that. They should be performing better than that. They should have quality in that. And actually, interestingly, I was listening at the final whistle. We had some national radio people behind us throughout this afternoon, and they were talking about how this Norwich group had gone through a cycle and was at the end of that cycle and needed an overhaul. I'm not going to go back there after every defeat, but it's interesting to get that kind of response from it, whether you agree or disagree. And look, there's no need to be reactive to this result. I feel a lot of this season has been Norwich fans, me included, us, everyone around this football club, being quite responsive and quite reactive to results. Really, really high when they win games and really quite low when they lose games. And probably people saying that, they've lost here today, that means they're not going to get top six. I don't think it does. They're too short. It's still a possibility. My personal feeling, I don't think they will. But also that every win means that they're going to, that they can challenge for automatic promotion, which is not, in my view, realistic either. So I think there does need to be a sense of perspective, because this doesn't materially alter their dynamics. They've dropped out, obviously, of the top six. They've lost ground. They're 2 points short again. But in reality, that's one win. They're in touching distance. It's not the type of result that is condemning to their season, or that means that they're not going to finish this year at Wembley or whatever. It doesn't mean that necessarily. But what it does point to, and the point I'm trying to make here, is the bigger picture. The fact that this team can produce a performance like that is quite scary, I would say, in terms of their prospects, because it comes at poor points, and it comes at points which are difficult to explain. I think after what was such a big high last weekend, I wonder, and this is just me theorising, whether that's had any kind of material impact on what we've seen today in terms of sluggishness. And it can be difficult, I think, when you put that much energy and there's so much hype and expectation and noise around the game, to come a week after and produce a result. But listen, I think Sunderland as well deserve credit for the job that they did tactically. It was a really astute plan that Tony Mowbray comprised, and that the players delivered as well. And they were fully worthy of their 3 points. They probably could have won this by more in the first half, in truth. And that's a big testament to them. Obviously, they've got plenty of injuries at this moment in time, but also they've just come off the back of a 5-0 drubbing to Stoke. And I didn't necessarily feel that result depicted the overall game and how the game went as well. A lot of those goals were scored after Sunderland opened up. And that's probably the frustration to an extent, because if Norwich City could have got their noses in front here this afternoon, Sunderland would have had to come out, and then this game becomes completely different. They didn't. And I think when you give a team like Sunderland, who were defending in the manner that they did, and I think you tend to see it when teams get beaten quite heavily, they are pretty pragmatic. There's a real determination, a real steely grit about them to try and go, particularly if they're going away from home, to get a result. And that's what Norwich City endured today. It was a lot of huff, but in the end they just could not break into or penetrate Sunderland's defensive resolve, which was superb. And it's the type of result that can happen in the Championship and can happen in a season as well. And that's why I think it's important not to be too emotional and not to react with any kind of overarching or oversweeping statements. Norwich City can still make the top six. They're still in a better position than they were 2 or 3 weeks ago to do just that. But it underlines, I think, for me, the challenge ahead, because, and look, I understand supporters getting carried away after victories, but talk of automatic promotion for me was extremely premature and very, very ambitious. So I hope it will just kind of realign everybody and refocus everybody. They've got a big week of games coming up now. They've got to go to Huddersfield and they've got to go to Stoke. Those are I know Huddersfield are at the wrong end of the table, but a Neil Warnock team in a relegation scrap is certainly not one to draw a line under and presume that there's going to be some sort of victory there. But Norwich now do need to produce a response, and they certainly will move into that game as favourites for that. Stoke next weekend poses a really interesting challenge for me. I think Alex Neil is a better coach than what they've shown. They're going through a little bit of a transition at the moment. Feels like they're going to kind of rip up their squad in the summer as well. And they've produced a couple of really good results, beaten Sunderland, beaten Blackburn in their last two. They'll really fancy that, and I'm sure Alex Neil will really fancy that as well. So, look, this result, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it's one that's worth completely panicking about. The only concern I would say is that, I think I said this on the previous show on Friday, you look at Norwich City's underlying numbers, they've been running really hot in terms of attacking output, attacking productivity. You only have to look at the goals they've scored. Marcelino Nunez, that wonderful volley against Birmingham. It was Birmingham, wasn't it? It was Birmingham. And Gabriel Sara last week. They've been scoring a real sort of low percentage, what I call low percentage chances. Other people might use a more technical term like worldy or something along those lines. But that level of output and that type of goal, scoring that consistently, is not sustainable. And so I think, and this is my sort of wider concern that maybe I will leave you with this afternoon, is that, and potentially I'm just tentatively mention this rather than, and I'm posing it as a question rather than a full kind of conclusion. I just fear whether those type of goals have kind of masked over the creativity issues, because still Norwich, and again today, Tim Akuki, who didn't have his best game, didn't really get a sniff. Josh Sargent didn't really get a sniff. Their opportunities came from outside the box rather than inside the box. There are a few set pieces that they won contacts to. There were a couple of times they overplayed set pieces as well. So I just fear, and it's a very, very premature fear, but I just wonder now whether this is a spell of form where Norwich City have run really hot in terms of their attacking output. And so obviously the answer to that will be found in the next 10 games, but also whether or not that creativity, which has caused an issue all season, to be completely honest, whether we're beginning to see that even out a little bit, and they'll have to find a solution to that. And also it's worth adding that that has been a criticism of David Wagner teams in the past. Obviously not at Norwich City, that there have been maybe some concerns around creativity. But look, they're all there to be answered. I'm happy to be proven wrong, and I often am proven wrong, but it's just an early fear that I'm beginning to sense now, that maybe we're beginning to see Norwich City's spell of running hot just dry up a little bit, and that will mean that they have to find productivity from other areas, which is why last weekend the set piece goals were so pleasing. But look, no need to press the panic button, and I would certainly urge everybody not to do that. I think you need a sense of perspective, and David Wagner and the players have got it right. You can't be too high after a win last weekend at Millwall, and you can't be too low after a defeat today. Materially, they are in a better position to get the top six than they were than when David Wagner took charge. They've got 6 games left. I wish 10 games left this season. Some really tough games on the horizon as well. April looks an incredibly big month. Middlesbrough, Sheffield United, and Blackburn all to play. Sheffield United here, Middlesbrough and Blackburn away. They've got West Brom to play. So they've got some really big teams left. Feels like they're going to need quite a high number of wins out of those 10 games, if I'm being completely honest, and that could be the case. But I think the way that they're playing is certainly much improved in terms of their overall performance. And look, ultimately, the individual errors thing has been an issue all season. We've all seen it. We've all felt it. Opposition teams are looking to exploit it. And that's what Sunderland have done here today. And I think actually pound for pound, that's as good a team, with the exception of Burnley perhaps, that we've seen come here this season. Obviously we haven't seen Sheffield United and we've seen Middlesbrough. Maybe put Middlesbrough in a higher bracket, but they're certainly in the top tier of teams that we've seen come to Carrow Road, and there's been a lot of kind of grudge here this season as well. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective on it. I'm trying to keep quite level-headed and quite reasoned about it. Obviously, the next week feels quite important, an opportunity, particularly Wednesday, to respond. I'm fearful of the type of game that might become, and I hope it doesn't. Stoke, I feel, is a real toughie, but we'll worry about Wednesday night first. Of course, plenty more coverage on Pinken.com and on the Pinken Plus app. We've got lines from David Wagner. There's a line up there at the moment from Angus Gunn. He confirmed to us after the game that he's switched his international allegiance. I would expect to see him in the Scotland squad for the upcoming European Championship qualifiers against Cyprus and Spain that they have at the end of this month, which will be good. Of course, following in his son, get very confused and muddled, which is probably a sign that I need to sign off. Following in his father's footsteps when he does represent his country. And actually, I think Brian only got 6 caps for Scotland, didn't he? So there's a possibility that he could surpass that pretty quickly, which will be interesting. Right, that seems like a nice place to leave it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's been a very odd weekend for sport and for football, I think, but we've got through it, and sadly it's ended in a Norwich City defeat. Thank you very, very much for watching, not just today, but throughout the season and throughout the last few weeks. And we'll see what we get at Huddersfield, and we'll see what Norwich City we get. Thanks very much for watching.